think we've only got one more presenter left. Bron, whenever you are ready, more than excited to hear about how you've been supporting all our non-tech savvy users.
Yay!
Whenever you're ready.
Excellent. Let me just get this ready. All right. Hello, everybody. Can you see my slides and only my slides?
Yes, that's all we see. Great.
Excellent. Technology. I'm talking about dealing with non-tech savvy users, and here's me questioning PowerPoint. So hi, everybody. I'm Bron. Most of you probably know me by now. I've been building and supporting systems for a long time now. Not going to put years on it because it'll age me. I've handled some absolute doozies during support during that time. And I've built some well-designed systems, and I've built some not so well-designed systems as well, as we all would have. And throughout all this, I have managed to never actually murder a user. I can tell you I've come close, even just in the last 24 hours. So yay, the joys of that. So I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about my experiences with supporting users, both as a supporting person speaking with users and just building systems that are usable by those non-tech savvy users. And just also one apology straight up, I do have children and a husband who may walk in out of nowhere. So sorry if that happens and tantrums happen. So why do we need to talk about this now? Well, back years ago, there was a joke that you didn't let the coders talk to the users. You would stick them behind a computer in the dark corner and let them do their job. And you'd have other people to speak to the users. And I myself used to hide like this, and I dreaded when I did have to call a user for anything, break out in flushes and sweats, and suddenly have to put on a totally different hat to what I was comfortable with. Now, in large organisations, that might still be true, especially where there are support teams who are providing that first level of support. But in small organisations, it's often the developers who are providing that first line of support as well. We can't hide our Richmonds away anymore. Now, I'm also going to say almost every slide in this talk could have had an IT crowd reference picture in it. I haven't done that. I've avoided it. So that's my only IT crowd reference. But yeah, we all know, if you've seen the IT crowd, you know that they hide Richmond away in the basement. We can't do that anymore. Now, what happens then when you do have to talk to actual users, if you've spent most of your day talking code and tech, it can be hard to articulate yourself clearly to non-tech familiar users, non-tech savvy users. I keep using that term and I'll keep using it. It can be hard to talk to them in a way that doesn't just come across as gobbledygook to them. And sometimes you can even be surprised that some things that you say, you think are very plain and simple, but to a user, they instantly start turning off and saying things like, oh no, I'm no good with computers, or I'm not tech savvy. And even self-deprecating statements like, oh, I'm useless. Now, my first response when users start talking like that is always basically to say, absolutely not. And I'm here to make this simple for you. And it's okay to ask any questions that you need to. As a developer, also, not only if you are having to talk with customers, either face-to-face or on the phone or through email, you also are the one building the solutions and supporting those customers. And you need to make them feel comfortable and understood in what they're doing day to day with the software. So whose responsibility is it anyway? Well, we have the UX designers, of course, who are there making beautiful looking products that work smoothly. Obviously, the UX is user experience. So that it is very much part of their responsibility to make sure that the software that is being designed is simple to use and clear for the users. The product managers also are obviously a key part of that. And they're the ones also who are providing that bridge between the UX designers and the developers, and making sure that everybody's on the same page, making sure that all of the testing has been done of the designs, the user testing, so in my experience, at least in my startup even now and in other projects that I've worked on, these two roles are generally the first gatekeepers for building user-friendly experiences. You do also have the support officers who are talking with the customers if you're in that size team, but of course, if you're in a smaller team, then that might just be you, the developer, or it might be a few of you helping out. Even if you have a support team, sometimes they might not be available, and you might have to jump in and help. But the developers and also the testers, when the development's done, the developers are in control at the time of building the software. And if you're a developer, you actually need to call out. You actually need to call out any assumptions that you come across as you're building that software, because sometimes things do slip through those cracks. Sometimes the UX designers and the product managers and all the user testing, it doesn't dig into some of the edge cases that you might find when you're building that software. And you should absolutely feel like you have a voice, and you should be able to raise your hand and say, oh wait, you didn't think of this. And I've dealt with a lot, I've seen a lot of systems where it's clear that the developer, if they did find those edge cases, they just went with their own assumptions. And let's face it, also sometimes as developers, we might not think as clearly in terms of how something should work. We might overcomplicate things. So it's good to get other people involved if you come across those sort of areas that need more fleshing out before building them. Yeah, so don't just blindly build based on the requirements that you're given. And if something could be ambiguous, raise it with the product manager. So some basic guidelines that I've come up with to follow. First of all, don't assume knowledge by the user. So when you first start talking to a user, you could probably assume quite safely that they are not familiar with the tech, that they're not comfortable talking in a tech language, but do also judge their skills and capabilities and adjust accordingly. We've probably all had that experience where we're talking to tech support, and because we are capable of bringing up a command prompt, there's nothing worse than being slowly walked through that process of opening up the run command and starting the command prompt. So do adjust accordingly, but be prepared that some users will say, I know what I'm doing, and then you'll find that actually maybe they didn't know what they were doing as much as they thought. So don't also run off on them and start getting them to open up, complicated screens and deal with those and assume that they'll know what they're doing. Be really aware of your language. Now, this is both when building and designing software, and also when supporting users. So be aware of domain language and abbreviations that new users may not be familiar with as well. And that might be domain language as in the domain of the product. So whatever you're building. So for example, in a travel platform that I'm building, there's a lot of travel related concepts in there that some users may not be familiar with, even though they're planners of travel. They may not yet have come across these new terms. But also in terms of tech language as well. So for a perfect example is using the word string. We all know that a string is a set of characters that have been strung together to make a word or a sentence. Ask a non-developer friend what a string is though. They'll come up with a very different definition, and almost always they won't know what a string is, and yet it can be tempting to refer to something as a string in a pop-up dialogue to say only include alphanumeric characters in your string. Alpha and numeric might be all right, but characters even, that's quite a technical term. And that actually also brings in English being a second language. So a word like character is a commonly used word for us, but it's not such a common word when people are learning the English language. So think also about keeping your language simple so that users don't come across words that they're not at all familiar with yet. when you're talking with a user, be okay with funny user-specific language. It doesn't affect you when a client says, oh, okay, so I use Google for their internet. And you know that they mean Chrome, but they call it Google, and you don't have to correct them every time they say, okay, I've opened Google. I know it can be very tempting sometimes because you want to set them on the right track, but sometimes that user-specific sort of non-text specific language is okay for the space of the 5 minutes that you're on the phone with them. Simplify as much as you can as you're building a system. You do need to find a balance between simplicity and clarity. There's a battle, for example, between white space and lovely clean designs versus the user's ability to understand that UI. You might have to put that extra little bit of text there to explain something to them, even if it's only a temporary measure until the user's familiar with that screen. And again, it goes back to, don't be afraid to raise that. If you're a developer, raise that with the UX designer early on to say, well, hang on, should we be explaining that to the user a bit more? I mean, that's also part of UX design, obviously, but that can depend on the UX designer's experience as to whether or not they think of that. So, put yourself into their shoes. Try to think like the user so you can be empathetic to their situation. Keep in mind also how hard it can be to explain things when you're not 100% comfortable with the topic. It can be downright embarrassing to try to explain something to someone that you know is an expert in the field. Try talking to a friend sometime about something that they're an expert in and you're not, and go through, perhaps try to explain the steps to do something that they know absolutely how to do. And you can almost feel like an idiot when you're trying to say something and you're not 100% sure if what you're saying is correct or if the language is correct, and you think that they're just standing there looking at you thinking, what are you talking about? That's how users feel when they're talking to tech people about tech things. So learn how to make people feel unjudged and comfortable when explaining things to you, and don't belittle them and use language. Instead, you need to use language that does encourage them. So, for example, rather than saying, why would you do that? Try saying, I'm just trying to understand the purpose behind that. Let's work this out first. And rather than seeing somebody click a button and it's the wrong button, instead of saying, don't do that, try saying, okay, next time maybe you could try doing this instead, and be gentle with them, because it'll build a stronger relationship with you and you'll generally find that you get to the answer faster for them. And most importantly, be patient. When dealing with users, remember that they can sense your impatience, and that can lead to discomfort and friction between you as well. Don't curse behind the scenes. Don't sigh loudly. Don't even frown or scrunch your face up on the phone. They'll sense it, and it'll just cause that friction between you. All right, when things go a little bit wrong, we've all had that experience, for example, where users are double clicking things. So my co-founder actually had a fun story when she was in New York City supporting product where the user was in the UK once, and they couldn't get a report to open in their website. And she could not work out for months what was going wrong. But whenever this particular user tried to open this report, it wouldn't open. Eventually, a few months down the track, she was in the UK sitting next to them, and she got, and she said to them, show me what you're doing. I want to see this report. And that's when she saw that they were double clicking, and in double clicking, it wasn't opening the report. So the takeaway from that for her and for all of us was, try to imagine that you're actually sitting next to the user and think what they might be doing that could affect the outcome. It's really difficult, but just think about the things that might be changing what's happening for them. It could be something in their environment around them. It could be the way that they're interacting with the system. Maybe they're trying to tab through pages or something, all sorts of things. But just try and think about what it might look like if you were sitting next to them to see if that can help you work out what the cause of the problem is. Another case that one of my colleagues was telling me about recently, and I have heaps of these stories as well, but some of these are just so much funnier than mine that I had to share them. She was once supporting a user who, and she needed to make sure that a specific file existed on their computer. So she asked the user to look at the root folder to see if the file was there, and the user couldn't find the file. And they went around in circles for a few minutes until finally she realized the user was looking for a folder called root. Now, the takeaway from this, of course, is try to think like a user. Don't assume that they know your language, and people will take things literally. So if you say look for the folder, look in the root folder, they're going to look for a folder called root. So be aware of the language that you use. It goes back to like earlier when I said about the word string. Don't use the word string to a user. They're not going to know what it means. In my startup, which is a travel tech startup, we've had a lot of learning curves with understanding how our software is used by users of varying degrees. And one of my favorite stories actually came up about a year ago when we had a plan to receive a payment from a traveler. They wanted to clear the payment out and reset the traveler's amount that they owed back to zero. So they came into the payments view. The traveler had made a payment. They clicked the receive payment button and entered a payment of zero, thinking that that was how they might set the payment back to zero for that user. Now, without full context of the system, this isn't going to be as clear as it would be if you've seen the whole system. But noting also, they wanted to clear out that payment the user had made, and they wanted to reset the traveler's amount owing back to zero. So they clicked receive payment, entered an amount of zero, and saved it, and it made no difference. And then they tried 4 more times. When we came in to look at the trip, they had 5 zero amount payments in the system, and they were saying, why isn't this working? All the while, there was also this button right next to it for update cost, and they never even tried to click that. Now, they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. But in my experience, perfectly sane users will try to do the same thing at least twice to see if it behaves differently each time. So be aware of that, be prepared for that. Language does matter. We ended up finding the solution was just to change up the language completely. So instead of receive payment, we now say manual payment made. And instead of update costs, we say edit the traveler's base price. There have been a lot of iterations to get to that point. We had to be really careful and do a lot of user testing for that. So sometimes it can be very difficult, but it's possible to find that perfect language where we have no more issues happening now. Well, so far, I should say. Now, I have a last case, and this is a really fun one, but I think I'm actually out of time, so I'm going to have to skip this. But let's just say it was a very complicated system that involved end users seeing a message and misunderstanding completely what that message meant. And again, it was like the last situation where the users tried to do the same thing over and over and over and over again. They logged in and out of their Windows account 7 times, some of them, before finally calling the support desk to say something's not wrong with my account and I've basically logged it out. Just always keep in mind, users do things that you don't think that they would do, and you need to prepare for this. And sometimes you can't actually solve that. Sometimes you can't preempt what a user's going to do, but be prepared for this and follow all those suggestions that I gave earlier so that you're patient with them and can handle those situations when they do come up. The end message from all of this is to remember that you want these users to remain as users. It's an important part of it's how your product runs, right? You can't have your product without your users, whether or not they're internal users or external users. And an important part of that is making them feel comfortable raising tickets so that they know that they can get the help that they need when they do. You don't want users to feel like if they log a ticket, they're going to deal with that person in tech support who's rude and impatient, and so they don't log the ticket and instead they start using another product. That's it from me. Thank you everybody for listening.
That was so, so good. I've just realized, I'm like, I don't know how everybody did it, but without having a reaction to things, I laughed so much at the I am rate. Just saying, I loved that. That was great. And also, I've definitely also done that to my parents where I'm like, just go to the root folder. And they're like, what? Just never went. But yeah, that was really good.
Thank you. I will say it's really hard not having responses coming through. You have no idea what everybody's saying or thinking.
Especially when there are people like happened a bunch of times, especially when they're like, I think it was like Jack doing like the disclaimers and stuff. And I was like,
yes.
Oh, for you. That's great. I've just noticed that Sarani's put up all her links on the DDD by Night Slack channel. So if people did want to go check that out, they're up there. I think we'll try and get everyone's slides and stuff up onto the Slack channel if they're comfortable sharing those up there. But other than that, this was our first virtual DDD by night. I think we had about 50 people come along to it. So that was really, really cool. That's kind of it for me, I think. Leah, unless there's anything else you want me to add.
No, that's all good.
Okay, cool. Enjoy your evening. That's it.